He was standing on the wrong side of the barrier tape when I first saw him, and the bridge was making a sound I had never heard a bridge make before, and I thought, whoever that man is, he's going to get both of us killed, and I'm going to let him. My name is Rafferty Cole. I'm 34 years old. I am a structural operations engineer for the Virginia Department of Transportation, which means I am the person who gets called at 2:19 a.m. when the James River Bridge starts singing in a frequency that no bridge should ever sing in. I've worked 7 states, 11 major crossings, and 1 partial collapse in West Virginia that I don't talk about at dinner. I know the sound of stressed steel the way a musician knows a missed note, not just with my ears, but somewhere lower in the chest, in the gut, in the place where the body keeps its honest reactions. The sound the Manchester Bridge was making at 2:19 a.m. on a February Thursday was the sound of something that had been holding on for a very long time and was reconsidering, and on the wrong side of the barrier tape, hands on his hips, head tilted up, studying the undercarriage with the focused calm of a man doing a crossword puzzle, was a paramedic. I know he was a paramedic because of the jacket. Henrico County EMS, reflective stripe, the kind of jacket that has seen things. He was maybe 6'1", dark-haired, and he was standing approximately 40 feet out on a bridge deck that my preliminary sensor data said was experiencing asymmetric load distribution in the southbound spans, which is engineer language for get off the bridge right now. Hey, I called. Sir, you need to come back behind the tape. He looked at me, even from 40 feet. Even in the sodium vapor lighting of a closed highway bridge at 2 a.m., the look registered, not defiance, not the look of someone who thinks rules don't apply to him. Something more careful than that. Evaluating, are you the structural engineer? He said. His voice carried clean across the deck, a voice accustomed to being heard through noise. I am, I said, and this deck is compromised. I need you behind the tape. I have a patient, he said. 17-year-old female. She was on the bridge when it was closed. She's approximately 60 feet behind me, southwest pedestrian lane, possible spinal. I couldn't move her without equipment I don't have out here. My unit is on the north bank. They can't cross because your barrier is blocking the vehicle access. I stood at the edge of the tape for 1 full second, then I ducked under it. Stop, because what I'm about to tell you is the thing that still keeps me awake, and it has nothing to do with the bridge. His name was Soren Weil. He was 36 years old. He had been on a routine transfer call when the bridge closure went into effect, had seen a teenager through the pedestrian rail as his unit was being turned around, had parked on the south access road and gone in on foot because waiting for authorization felt, to him, like a category error when there was a person in distress 60 feet away. I didn't know any of that yet. What I knew, walking toward him on a bridge that was making sounds I didn't like, was that his body language was the most controlled thing on that entire span. Not stiff, controlled. The way a person is controlled when they've learned that panic is expensive and they can't afford it. His hands were loose at his sides. His weight was balanced. He was watching my face the way you watch a barometer, not for the number itself, but for the direction it's moving. How long has she been down? I said when I reached him. 11 minutes since I found her. She was trying to walk. I stopped her. A pause. Good call or bad call? Good call, I said. If there's spinal involvement and she'd kept moving? That's what I thought, he said, not relieved. Just confirming his math. I need your access to get my unit onto the deck. I need to assess the span before I put another 3 tons on it, I said. He looked at me. I looked at him. We were standing, I realized, approximately 4 feet apart on a compromised bridge at 2 in the morning, and the bridge was still making that sound, and his eyes were the particular shade of dark that makes you think, irrationally, of depth. How long does your assessment take? He said, 12 minutes if nothing surprises me. She's stable for 12 minutes, he said. Go. I went, and here's what I need you to understand about the next 12 minutes. Soren Weil walked with me, not in the way of, not hovering. He walked at my left shoulder, half a step back, and he was quiet in the way that very few people know how to be quiet. Present quiet, not absence quiet. The kind of quiet that means I'm here if you need something, and I know you don't need anything right now. I pulled the portable sensor kit from my bag and started reading the expansion joints. He watched my hands. When I needed to crouch to access the lower deck plate sensor, I crouched, and he shifted his weight to give me room without being asked. At the 7th sensor point, he said quietly, "What are you looking for?" "Differential settlement," I said. "The spans are moving at different rates. If the gap at joint 4 exceeds," I checked the reading, "it's at 6 millimeters. Threshold is 8. We have room." "We have room," he repeated, not a question. Confirming he had the information correctly, We have room, I said. And then, because something about his stillness made me honest in a way I wasn't usually honest with people I'd met 4 minutes ago. For now, he nodded. Then let's use it. Here's the question I couldn't stop asking myself, and I think you already know the answer. We got the unit onto the bridge. I authorized it. The weight distribution read clean on the sensors. Barely, but clean. Soren's partner brought the gurney. Soren directed the patient packaging with the specific authority of someone who has done this in a ditch, in a stairwell, in the back of a helicopter, in conditions that made a compromised bridge feel almost comfortable. I stood 12 feet back and watched him work. I want to be precise about this. I watched him work. The way his hands moved, sure and deliberate and gentle, all three things at once, which I hadn't known was possible. The way he talked to the girl, 17 years old, scared, her name was Priya. She kept asking if her parents were coming, in a voice that was simultaneously calm and specific, never vague, never falsely cheerful. You're doing great. Your spine is protected. The pain you feel is from the cold, not from injury. Yes, your parents are coming. I need you to keep very still for me. She kept very still. Of course she did. If he'd told me to keep very still, I would have. At 3:04 a.m., they moved her off the bridge. I watched the unit's taillights until they cleared the barrier. Then I turned back to the sensors. Behind me, I heard footsteps. I turned. Soren was still there. Your unit left, I said. My partner has her, he said. I came in on foot. I have to go out on foot. A beat. Also, your bridge is still making that sound. I know, I said. Is that a problem? I looked at the expansion joint. I looked at him. He was standing under one of the highway overheads now, and the light was hitting him from above and slightly to the left. And his face was, I'm going to say it plainly, because I am a person who deals in precise language, and imprecision here would be dishonest. His face was the most interesting thing I had looked at in a very long time. It might be, I said. I need to stay on the bridge until I'm sure. Okay, he said. Then I'll stay too. You don't have to. I know, he said. And I don't know if you've ever had someone choose to stay on a compromised bridge with you at 3 a.m., but I am here to tell you. It changes the air. We worked our way back through the sensor points, me reading, him walking at my shoulder. The bridge groaned once, a low, long sound that traveled through the deck plates and up through the soles of my boots, and I felt my hand tighten on the sensor kit, and without a word, Soren's shoulder moved against mine. Not dramatically, not a grab, just contact. Shoulder to shoulder for 2 full seconds, steady and warm and deliberate. Then the sound passed, and we both kept walking. I have been on a lot of bridges in bad condition. I have never felt steadier on one. At sensor point 11, I crouched to read the joint measurement, and my boot slipped on a patch of February ice I hadn't seen. Not a fall. I caught myself immediately, one hand on the rail. But for 1 second, my center of gravity went wrong, and in that same second, Soren's hand was at my elbow. Firm. Sure. There, before I'd registered the slip myself, I straightened. His hand stayed for a moment longer than strictly necessary. Neither of us mentioned it. Joint 11, I said, looking at the reading. 6.4. Still under threshold. Still under threshold, he said. His hand withdrew slowly. Like he was aware of it, like the withdrawal was a choice he was making deliberately, which meant the staying had been too. I looked up at him. He was close, closer than the task required, though neither of us had moved to create that distance or close it. The overhead light caught the line of his jaw. His eyes were on the sensor reading, but they moved to my face, and for one suspended moment, we were just 2 men on a bridge at 3 a.m., looking at each other with the kind of attention that has stopped pretending to be about something else. Thank you, I said. For the elbow. Any time, he said quietly, like it was a promise. By 3:40 a.m., I had enough sensor data to make a preliminary call. The bridge was stable but needed a full structural review at first light, lane closures for a minimum of 72 hours, and an emergency inspection of the south span anchor bolts. I called it in to VDOT operations. I was on the phone for 11 minutes. Soren sat on the concrete barrier at the bridge's edge, inside the tape, the correct side now, and waited. Not scrolling his phone, not pacing, just sitting, forearms on his knees, watching the James River below. The river was running high with February melt, dark and fast, catching the city lights in fragments. When I ended the call, I walked over and sat beside him. There was perhaps 10 inches between us on the barrier. The cold was serious, mid-20s, river wind, and I could feel the warmth coming off him at that 10-inch distance, the way you feel a radiator from across a room. "How's the bridge?" he said, without looking away from the river. "Alive," I said, "for now." "Good." A pause. "How are you?" It was the 3rd time a person had asked me that question, and the first time in recent memory I'd had to actually think about the answer. I've been better, I said. I've been much worse. He looked at me then, turned his head. We were sitting side by side, so it was a slow turn, a turn that brought his face close to mine in the way that happens when two people are already adjacent and one of them simply chooses to look. The space between our faces was not large. 6 inches, maybe 7. Bad night? He said. No, I said, and I meant it. Strange night, but not bad. Something shifted in his expression. Slow, the way the river was slow. Powerful underneath its surface, moving everything even though from above it looked almost still. Me neither, he said. But here is the part I haven't told you yet. The part that reframes everything that came before it. I had met Soren Vale once before. 8 months earlier, at a VDOT coordination meeting in the Henrico County building on East Parham Road, one of those interagency sessions that everyone attends and nobody remembers. I had given a 10-minute presentation on bridge weight limit protocols for emergency vehicles. He had been in the 3rd row. He had asked the only question worth asking. What's the failure mode we're most likely to miss, and how would we know we'd missed it? I had answered him. I had thought about the question for the rest of that day. I had not remembered his face until right now, sitting on a barrier above the James River, when it came back to me all at once. The 3rd row, the question, the precision of it, and something in my chest did a thing that chests do when they recognize something they weren't prepared for. East Parham Road, I said. 8 months ago. He looked at me for a long moment, and then, slowly, the way all his expressions moved, he smiled. Not a small smile, a full one. The kind that changes the geometry of a face, that reaches the eyes and keeps going, and I felt it like a change in atmospheric pressure. You remembered the question, he said. I thought about it for 3 hours, I said. Good answer, he said. His voice was very low. We were very close. I thought about your answer for about the same amount of time. The river moved below us. The bridge groaned once more, quietly, like a thing settling into itself. The city of Richmond glittered on both banks, not beautiful in the tourist brochure way, but beautiful in the working way. The way a thing is beautiful when it is doing what it was built to do, and doing it through difficulty. I became aware, in a very specific way, of the remaining inches between us, of the fact that if either of us shifted our weight, just slightly, just a few degrees, those inches would close, of the fact that neither of us was shifting, which was its own kind of statement. I should get your number, I said, for the incident report. And then, because that was obviously not the only reason, and for other reasons. His smile didn't widen, it deepened, which is different and better. Give me your phone, he said. I handed it to him. Our fingers overlapped in the exchange. Neither of us moved quickly. He typed, he handed the phone back. His fingers stayed against mine for 1 beat longer than the handoff required. I looked at the screen. He'd put his name and number, and underneath it, in the notes field, 3rd row. The question was for you. I read it twice. Then I looked at him. He was watching me read it, and his face was open in the particular way faces are open when they've just done something honest and are waiting to find out if the honesty was safe. I turned my phone face down on my thigh. I looked at him. The 6 or 7 inches between our faces were maybe 5 now. Neither of us had moved, exactly, but something had shifted the way something shifts when two people stop performing the distance between them. The question was for me, I said. I'd seen your work, he said. The West Virginia report. You were the only engineer who published an honest failure analysis on a partial collapse you'd been involved in. He paused. I wanted to know how someone who'd been through that thought about the thing they'd missed. My throat did something. I managed to keep my voice level. It is a skill, like his stillness, like the way he talked to Priya on the cold bridge deck. What did you find out? He was quiet for a moment. His eyes moved across my face, slowly, the way he did everything, without hurry, like someone who has decided that paying attention is worth the time it takes. That you think about failure honestly, he said, and that you stayed on the bridge tonight when you could have called it from the South Bank. A pause. Those two things are related. I had no answer for that, partly because it was true, partly because when he said it, the 5 inches between our faces were maybe 4, and I was very conscious of the cold air and the warm space and the specific quality of his attention, which felt like something I had been trying to describe for a long time, without having the vocabulary for it. Soren, I said, yeah, I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to know that I don't typically... I stopped. Started again. I am not a person who does things before he thinks them through. I know, he said, like he actually knew, like 8 months plus 1 night had given him enough data. I want to see you again, I said, not for the incident report. He looked at me for a long, still moment, the river below, the groaning bridge, Richmond glittering on both sides. Then he leaned forward, just slightly, just a few degrees, and his forehead came to rest against mine, gentle, deliberate. The contact was so quiet and so certain that for a second I forgot the temperature, forgot the bridge, forgot the sensor readings that were still running on my tablet. His forehead against mine, 4 inches from the edge of the bridge, and neither of us was afraid, not for the incident report, he said, very quietly, against my face. Okay, I said, which was not a sufficient answer, but was the only word my chest had room for. We stayed like that for, I don't know how long. Long enough. The bridge made no more sounds. The river kept moving. At some point his hand found mine on the barrier, not holding, just present, palm against the back of my hand, warm through the cold. The security camera at the south barrier captures a timestamp of 4:11 a.m. I know because I pulled the footage for the incident report. In the footage, 2 figures are sitting side by side on a concrete barrier above the James River. The city lights are catching the water below. The taller figure's forehead is against the others. They are not moving. The image holds for 43 seconds before the camera cycles. 43 seconds doesn't sound long. I have watched that footage 4 times. It has felt each time like something much longer. Like something that had been a long time coming and arrived, as the things that matter most tend to arrive, without announcement and ahead of schedule. He texted at 7:22 a.m., 3 hours after we'd walked off that bridge in opposite directions toward opposite sides of the city. The incident report can wait. Breakfast can't. I know a place on East Carey Street that opens at 7. I was standing in the VDOT parking lot, engine running, heat up, watching the early light hit the James through the gaps in the downtown buildings. That specific Richmond winter light, thin and honest, the kind that doesn't flatter anything but makes everything look real. I'm already in my car, I typed back. Tell me the cross street. His response came in 12 seconds. The address. And then, beneath it, park on the street. I'll be the one outside. I'm bad at waiting inside when I could be outside. I drove. The bridge I had spent the night worrying over stood quiet and taped off in my rearview mirror, its sensors still running, its joints holding, its old steel doing what old steel does, enduring past the point that anyone thought it would. Enduring because that is what it was built for, and because sometimes, on a cold February night, someone stands on it long enough to know how much life it still has left. I found parking on East Carey Street at 7:31 a.m. I got out of the car. He was outside, just as promised. Coat collar up against the February cold, hands in his pockets, watching the street. When he saw me, he didn't wave. He didn't perform recognition. He just oriented toward me, the way a thing orients toward what it's been waiting for. Unhurried. Certain, I walked toward him. The morning was cold and clear, and the street was just beginning to wake up. When we were close enough, he took one hand out of his pocket and held it out. Not a handshake, the wrong angle for that, just open. An offering. I put my hand in his. We were standing on a sidewalk in Richmond, Virginia at 7:31 in the morning in the thin winter light, and his hand was warm and certain around mine, and the city was opening up around us the way cities do when the crisis has passed and the real morning has begun. And I thought about failure analysis and third rows and questions that are for someone in particular, and bridges that hold longer than anyone thought they would. You okay? He said. I keep being, I said. He looked at me, that long, unhurried, paying attention look. Me too, he said, and we went inside.